The Morrison estate looked like something pulled straight from a glossy magazine cover. Perfectly trimmed hedges, fountains that sparkled in the afternoon sun, and marble columns that seemed to whisper wealth with every glance. Yet, amid all that grandeur, a small garden became the stage for an event that would scar and shape lives forever. "Get that child away from here right now." David Morrison's thunderous voice sliced through the air, halting a scene of innocent joy. 9-year-old Luna Rodriguez froze where she stood, her tiny frame stiff with fear. She had been twirling around in the garden, holding the hand of Sophie Morrison, David's 7-year-old daughter, who giggled from her wheelchair as though nothing else in the world mattered. The moment had been pure, two little girls sharing laughter, until David's words shattered it all. Carmen, Luna's mother, rushed out from the kitchen with damp hands, her apron still clinging to her as evidence of her chores. "Mr. Morrison, I'm so sorry." She didn't mean. David cut her off with a glare sharp enough to pierce steel. "I don't need your excuses. You were hired to clean, Carmen. Not to let your daughter mingle where she doesn't belong." His finger pointed toward Luna, his tone dripping with disdain. "That girl is not fit to be near children of our standing." Luna's big brown eyes filled with tears, though she didn't cry. Even at 9, she understood the weight of his insult. Sophie stretched her little arms toward her friend, pleading. "Daddy, no. Luna is my friend. She makes me laugh." David's jaw tightened. "Enough, Sophie. Inside. Now." He turned his frustration back toward Carmen. "Control your child or you'll need to find work elsewhere." Carmen bowed her head, shame burning through her cheeks, and gently pulled Luna by the hand. They walked toward the back entrance in silence. But as Carmen's gaze dropped in embarrassment, Luna's lifted. She looked back at David, her young face etched with something far beyond her years, a flicker of resolve, a quiet promise that she would remember this day forever. Behind them, Sophie sobbed, reaching out as her father wheeled her away, her cries echoing down the marble corridors. In the kitchen, Luna finally whispered, "Mama, why is he so mean?" Carmen knelt down, brushing the wet strands of hair off her daughter's face. "Because, my love, some people grow up believing they're better than others. But listen to me." Her voice trembled as tears slipped down her own cheeks. "Those who carry kindness in their hearts, they always find a way to shine, no matter how hard the world tries to dim their light." Neither of them could have guessed that those words would carry Luna for decades. Neither David nor anyone in that mansion could have imagined that the little girl he dismissed with contempt would one day return, not as a servant's child but as a force powerful enough to change his life forever. Because that day, in the quiet sting of humiliation, Luna made an unspoken vow: she would never again be made to feel small. 20 years later, the vow had blossomed into destiny. Luna, now 29, walked briskly through the polished corridors of Children's Hope Hospital, her white coat swaying with purpose. Her nameplate read Dr. Luna Rodriguez, pediatric neurosurgeon, one of the youngest and most celebrated specialists in her field. Her focus, treating childhood paralysis, a choice born not of coincidence but of painful memory. The sound of her heels echoed as she passed anxious families in waiting rooms, children clutching teddy bears, parents whispering prayers. She carried herself with the calm confidence of someone who had not only mastered her craft, but had transformed every wound of her past into fuel. Still, beneath the polished surface, her heart carried scars. Her mother, Carmen, had passed 5 years earlier, taken by a cancer that could have been treated if only they'd had access to decent health care. On her deathbed, Carmen had whispered truths that made Luna's blood run cold. "That man, David Morrison, he never even paid me the minimum. I took what little he gave because we needed to eat. But he treated us like we weren't even human." Luna sat at her side, her hands trembling, memorizing every word as if it were carved into stone. "He fired me after that day in the garden," Carmen confessed weakly. "Told people I was incompetent and no one would hire me after that. His name on my reference was like a curse." Her mother's voice faded, but Luna's determination only grew. She finished her residency with fire in her heart, specializing in cases like Sophie's, as if each child she helped to walk again was one more blow against the memory of David Morrison's cruelty. And then fate laughed, as it often does, by placing a file on her desk that made her freeze. The name jumped off the page like a ghost from her past. Sophie Morrison, 27. Progressive paralysis. Urgent need for experimental surgery. Emergency contact. David Morrison. For a long moment, Luna stared at the file in disbelief. Then a smile crept onto her lips, sharp, controlled, and edged with irony. After 2 decades, the universe had delivered David Morrison into her hands. She dialed the number listed. It rang 3 times before a familiar, older voice answered. Morrison. Mr. Morrison, Luna said evenly, her tone professional. This is Dr. Luna Rodriguez from Children's Hope Hospital. I need to speak with you about your daughter's case. The silence stretched. She could almost hear his mind working, trying to connect the dots. Rodriguez. His voice hesitated. That name, it rings a bell. I'm not surprised, Luna replied softly. My mother was Carmen Rodriguez. She worked in your home. The line went dead quiet. For the first time in decades, David Morrison's certainty faltered. You're that woman's daughter. Yes, Luna said. And now, I'm the only surgeon who can save yours. The weight of her words lingered in the air, and Luna could hear his shallow breathing on the other end. In that single moment, the tables had turned. The man who once believed she was beneath him now stood at her mercy. 3 days later, the sound of expensive leather shoes clicking against marble echoed through the entrance of Children's Hope Hospital. David Morrison walked inside as though the place belonged to him. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his $2,000 tailored suit sharp, and every step carried the authority of a man used to bending the world to his will. At 62 he still projected an aura of power and control, or so he thought. I want to see the medical director, David barked at the receptionist, his voice loud enough for everyone in the waiting area to hear. He didn't even glance at the line of worried families who had been sitting for hours. David Morrison. Morrison Enterprises. My daughter's life is on the line and I won't waste time. The receptionist, Rosa, a middle-aged black woman whose years in hospitals had taught her more patience than most could imagine, looked at him steadily. Sir, Dr. Williams is currently in surgery. But Dr. Rodriguez, who is overseeing your daughter's case, will be available in 15 minutes. David's lips curled in disdain. I didn't come here to speak to subordinates. I want the person truly in charge. Rosa didn't flinch. She exchanged a knowing glance with the nurse beside her. They had both dealt with arrogant men like this countless times. But they also knew something David did not. Dr. Luna Rodriguez was no subordinate. She was one of the most respected pediatric neurosurgeons in the entire country. Mr. Morrison, Rosa said calmly, Dr. Rodriguez has saved hundreds of children's lives. She is exactly who you want on your daughter's case. David leaned closer, lowering his voice to a near growl. I could buy this entire hospital if I wanted. Don't tell me whose hands I should trust my daughter with. I'll decide that for myself. Rosa pressed a button beneath her desk, a quiet alert to Luna in her office upstairs. On the monitor, Luna had been watching the entire exchange through the security cameras. She couldn't help but smile. He hadn't changed. The same arrogance, the same sense of superiority, the same belief that money could erase all sins. But this time the balance of power was different. Luna reached for her phone and dialed a number she had stored the night before. James, it's Luna, she said when the line picked up. On the other end, James Carter, one of San Francisco's fiercest lawyers, immediately recognized her voice. Luna, what do you need? I'm calling in that favor you owe me, she said smoothly. 2 years earlier, Luna had saved Carter's daughter from permanent paralysis. He had offered her any fee she wanted, but she refused payment. Instead, she told him, one day I might need your help. Now that day had come. I want you to dig into David Morrison. Everything, taxes, business dealings, especially how he's treated domestic workers over the last 30 years. Carter let out a low whistle. Morrison, yes, I've heard of him. He's had multiple complaints with the Department of Labor. Exploitation of staff, underpayment, wrongful terminations. All covered up with money, but the cases are still there. Luna's pulse quickened. Can you get me detailed reports? Within 48 hours, Carter promised. Send me anything you already have and I'll do the rest. Downstairs, David paced impatiently in the hospital lobby. Sophie had been brought in by ambulance the night before, her condition worsening rapidly. Without surgery, doctors warned she had only months before her paralysis became total. Inside her private room, Sophie sat upright in bed, her face pale but her eyes steady. At 27, she had inherited her father's sharp mind, though not his arrogance. "Dad, please," Sophie begged, her voice hoarse. "Dr. Rodriguez is the best there is. I read about her. She's literally the only surgeon in the country who can do this procedure." "You don't understand, Sophie," David muttered, his jaw tight. "I know this woman. She has history with me. I can't trust her." "What kind of history?" Sophie pressed, her brow furrowing. David looked away, his silence louder than words. Sophie wasn't easily deceived. She pulled her laptop closer, searching quickly. Within minutes, articles filled her screen. Stories about Dr. Luna Rodriguez, the daughter of a cleaning lady, who had risen against all odds to become one of the youngest neurosurgeons in the nation. Her revolutionary surgical techniques had saved countless children. "Dad?" Sophie whispered as the truth dawned. "Rodriguez is a common last name, sure. But didn't we once have a cleaning lady named Carmen Rodriguez?" David's silence told her everything. "And her daughter," Sophie added slowly, her eyes widening, "was Luna. The same girl who used to make me laugh when I couldn't walk. It's her, isn't it?" David's face drained of color. He remembered the scene vividly, a small girl twirling in his garden, his harsh words, her tear-filled eyes. He had crushed her spirit with a single cruel moment. Sophie's voice trembled. "Dad, what did you do to her?" Before he could answer, the door opened. Luna stepped inside, wearing her white coat, her stethoscope draped effortlessly around her neck. She carried herself with calm authority. Her gaze fell on David, and for a moment, the years seemed to collapse. The frightened child had become a woman carved from resilience. "Good afternoon, Mr. Morrison," Luna said evenly. Then, turning to Sophie, her voice softened. "How are you feeling?" Sophie's eyes filled with relief. "Dr. Rodriguez, thank you for coming." "You've always been kind, Sophie," Luna said gently. "You were never the problem." David stood frozen, his usual confidence unraveling. The girl he had once dismissed as unworthy now stood as his daughter's only hope. "Have we reviewed your treatment options yet?" Luna asked calmly, directing her gaze at David. I want a second opinion," David said quickly, trying to regain control. "Another doctor." "Of course," Luna replied smoothly. "The next specialist is in Boston. He can see her in 3 to 4 weeks. Sophie gasped. 3 weeks? That might be too late, right, Dr. Rodriguez? Luna nodded gravely. Unfortunately, yes. This condition progresses quickly. The silence that followed was suffocating. David realized then that his power meant nothing here. Luna didn't need to push him. Time itself was her ally. "I'll give you until tomorrow to decide," Luna said, placing a set of forms on the bedside table. She turned to leave, her eyes meeting David's one last time. The look she gave him was calm but unyielding, the quiet determination of someone who had waited 20 years for justice. At the doorway she paused. "Oh, Mr. Morrison. I've documented my career extensively, including the experiences that shaped me. Funny how certain memories last forever, isn't it?" She walked out, leaving David trembling, Sophie wide-eyed, and the weight of 20 years of arrogance crashing down like a storm. The following morning, the hospital corridors buzzed with quiet urgency. Nurses pushed carts, monitors beeped steadily, and families whispered anxious prayers. In Sophie Morrison's private room, tension hung as heavy as the sterile air. David sat stiffly in a leather chair by his daughter's bedside, staring at the untouched paperwork Luna had left the night before. His mind replayed her words endlessly, "This time I make the rules." Never in his life had anyone spoken to him with such calm authority, let alone the daughter of a maid he had once humiliated. Sophie stirred, her body trembling from spasms that shook her frail frame. "Dad," she whispered weakly, "time is running out." I can feel it. Her fingers gripped the sheets, the muscles in her arms twitching as if betraying her desperation. David leaned forward, trying to sound strong. I won't let anything happen to you. But even as he spoke, he knew his words were hollow. For once, money could not buy an easy solution. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. The door opened and Luna entered, carrying a brown leather briefcase. Her expression was professional, her composure unshaken. Good morning, she greeted, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut through David's unease. Sophie, how are you feeling today? Not good, Sophie admitted honestly. But knowing you're here, it makes me feel safer. David's jaw clenched. The bond between his daughter and this woman, the same girl he had scorned 2 decades earlier, gnawed at his pride. Luna placed her briefcase on the bedside table, clicking it open with deliberate care. Before we proceed, Mr. Morrison, there are some documents we need to discuss. David frowned. What kind of documents? Luna drew out a folder, her eyes locked on his. Research. About you. Courtesy of my attorney, James Carter. The color drained from David's face. He knew that name. Carter was notorious for tearing apart corporate giants in court. Over the past decade, Luna continued smoothly, your company has been the subject of no fewer than 47 complaints filed with the Department of Labor. Exploitation of staff. Subminimum wages. Unsafe working conditions. Wrongful terminations. Ring any bells? Sophie's eyes widened. Dad, is that true? David stammered. Those claims were exaggerated. Nothing was proven. Oh, but the records exist, Luna pressed, sliding a sheet across the bed for Sophie to see. 47 families systematically stripped of dignity. Some lost homes. Some lost children to illnesses they couldn't afford to treat. All because of your practices. Sophie's trembling hands picked up the paper, scanning the lines with disbelief. Dad, how could you? David reached for her, his voice strained. Sophie, business is complicated. These were business. Luna interrupted, her tone laced with quiet fire. Is that what you called it when you fired my mother under false pretenses? When you blacklisted her so no one would hire her again? She spent the rest of her life working odd jobs, dying from an illness that could have been treated if she had access to proper health care. And you dare call it business? David swallowed hard, his confidence crumbling. He could not meet her eyes. Sophie's lips trembled as tears welled in her eyes. Dad, you ruin people's lives. Luna pulled out another paper, her voice cold but steady. Here's an email your assistant sent in 2006 on your behalf, instructing HR to blacklist any applicant with references from the Morrison household. Do you deny this? David's hands shook as he reached for the paper but stopped midway. He remembered that directive, a petty move he'd written off as strategy. Now, exposed under Luna's gaze, it looked like cruelty carved into ink. My mother's name was on that list, Luna said softly. She never recovered from it. And neither did dozens of others. You destroyed them because you could. Sophie covered her mouth with her hands, silent tears running down her cheeks. Dad, I can't believe this. For a moment, David looked utterly broken, his empire of pride cracking under the weight of truth. But then his old defenses flared and he tried to sit straighter. This has nothing to do with Sophie's treatment. You're mixing personal grudges with medicine. Oh, but it has everything to do with it, Luna replied calmly, closing the folder. Because life has a strange way of bringing balance. 20 years ago, you told me I wasn't fit to stand beside your daughter. Today, I'm the only one who can save her. Her words sank like stones into the silence. Sophie whispered, Dr. Rodriguez, after everything my father did, are you still willing to help me? Luna's expression softened as she turned toward Sophie. You are not responsible for your father's choices. I didn't become a doctor to punish the innocent. I became a doctor to heal. And I will fight for you, Sophie, no matter who your father is. David looked between them, realizing how powerless he truly was. For the first time, he stood not as a powerful millionaire, but as a father at the mercy of the girl he had once dismissed as nothing. Luna gathered her papers, tucking them neatly back into her briefcase. Your surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 7. My team is ready. You have an 85% chance of full recovery. Sophie's eyes glistened with hope. Thank you. Luna's gaze hardened as she looked at David one last time. Mr. Morrison, understand this. I don't need your gratitude. I don't need your approval. But what I will have is justice. For my mother. For every family you crushed. And for the 9-year-old girl you once tried to silence. She turned toward the door, pausing only to add, my lawyer will be forwarding all findings to the Department of Labor and the IRS next week. I suggest you prepare yourself. David's body went rigid, his breath shallow. He had built walls of wealth his whole life, but in that moment he realized Luna had the power to tear them all down. Sophie reached for her father's hand, her voice trembling. Dad, maybe it's time you finally faced the truth. David stared at the floor, his empire of denial collapsing, as Luna's footsteps faded down the hall. The night before Sophie's surgery, the Morrison family's world felt as if it was hanging by a thread. Sophie had endured another wave of violent spasms, her body resisting sleep even as fatigue pulled at her eyes. Monitors beeped in steady rhythm beside her bed, marking time like a ticking clock counting down to the moment of truth. David sat by her side, his usually commanding posture crumpled into something smaller. For decades, he had been the man who dictated outcomes, business deals, court negotiations, even people's livelihoods. But here, in the sterile confines of a hospital room, his power evaporated. He was just a father grasping at control he no longer had. Sophie's voice broke the silence. Dad, I know you're scared. But Dr. Rodriguez, she's our best chance. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes shadowed. You don't understand, Sophie. That woman, she has every reason to despise me. But she doesn't, Sophie replied softly. If she hated you, she wouldn't be here. She wouldn't be trying to save me. David had no answer. His throat tightened as he remembered Luna's words, every one of them sharp, deliberate, heavy with years of buried pain. He knew she was right. He knew she held every advantage. And yet, there had been no vengeance in her treatment of Sophie. Just a fierce commitment to her patient. When dawn arrived, the hospital buzzed with the quiet urgency of preparation. Nurses wheeled in equipment, sterilized tools glinted under bright lights, and Luna strode through the hallway with the commanding calm of a general leading her troops. Her hair was tied back, her eyes steady, her every step echoing determination. In her office, she opened her phone to a message from James Carter. The subject line read, Final Report. She scrolled quickly, her lips tightening as she absorbed the details. Years of buried exploitation laid bare. Dozens of names, financial discrepancies, tax evasion, underpaid staff, and a trail of suppressed lawsuits that painted David Morrison's empire in unforgivable colors. Luna exhaled slowly, closing the file. Justice was coming, and not just in the operating room. At 6:45 a.m., she entered Sophie's room. David stood immediately, his face pale. Sophie looked up, managing a faint smile despite her weakness. Good morning, Luna greeted. She checked Sophie's vitals with practiced hands, then glanced at David. Mr. Morrison, you'll need to wait outside once we take her to the operating theater. David bristled. I should be in the room. No, Luna cut him off smoothly. Only my team belongs in there. And trust me, my team is the best you could ask for. For a moment, David looked like he might argue. But something in Luna's gaze stopped him. It was the same quiet authority she had carried since childhood, only now sharpened by years of training, years of strength. As Sophie was wheeled toward the surgical suite, David followed silently, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. He had never felt so helpless. Inside the operating theater, Luna stood over Sophie with unwavering composure. You're going to be fine, she told her patient gently. We'll take care of you. Sophie nodded faintly, her trust in Luna complete. The anesthesia mask lowered, and within moments Sophie slipped into unconsciousness. Scalpel, Luna requested calmly. The surgery had begun. Hours passed, each second stretching into eternity for David, who sat in the waiting room, staring at the ground. His mind wandered back to the garden 20 years earlier, Sophie reaching out to Luna, pleading for her father to see what he couldn't. He had dismissed that moment, too blind to recognize the bond between two children. And now, that bond had come full circle, stronger than anything money could build. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, the doors swung open. Luna emerged, removing her surgical cap. Her face was calm, professional, but her eyes held the faintest spark of triumph. David leapt to his feet. "Well, how is she?" "The procedure went smoothly," Luna said. "We achieved what we hoped for. Sophie will need time, therapy, and care, but her chances of full recovery are excellent." David nearly collapsed into his chair, relief washing over him. For once he didn't care about appearances. He cared only that his daughter would live. But Luna wasn't finished. She stepped closer, her voice low and deliberate. "I saved your daughter, Mr. Morrison. Not for you, but for her." David's eyes searched hers, a mixture of gratitude and shame battling in his expression. He opened his mouth to speak, but Luna raised a hand. "Don't thank me," she said coldly. "You'll have your chance to face what you've done. My lawyer is already preparing filings with the Department of Labor and the IRS. Your empire won't protect you this time." David's chest tightened, his relief tangled with dread. He wanted to protest, but he couldn't. The truth had cornered him from every angle. Luna's gaze softened only when she spoke of Sophie again. "Your daughter has a future because of this surgery. Make sure she doesn't inherit your mistakes." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving David sitting in silence, the weight of gratitude and impending ruin pressing down on him. In that moment he understood something he had never felt before, the crushing reality of being powerless in the face of someone you had once considered beneath you. The morning sun streamed weakly through the blinds of Sophie's hospital room. Machines beeped in steady rhythm, their soft sounds marking the fragile line between life and hope. Sophie stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. The first sensation she registered wasn't pain but something else, movement. Her toes. Her legs. For the first time in months, she felt a faint spark of life where there had only been numbness. "Dad?" Her voice was groggy, but her eyes widened as she tried to wiggle her toes again. "Dad, look." David sprang forward, disbelief flooding his face. He dropped to his knees beside her bed, staring at the tiny motion that seemed like a miracle. His eyes filled with tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed in decades. "Sophie, my God." Luna entered quietly, clipboard in hand, her expression calm and composed. "It will take time and rehabilitation, but yes, the surgery was a success." Sophie beamed, her face glowing with hope. "Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez." "Thank you." David turned toward Luna, emotion choking his voice. I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Luna replied evenly. Her gaze hardened slightly. "Your daughter has her second chance. That's all that matters right now." Sophie's joy filled the room, but the air between Luna and David was still heavy. Every glance between them carried 20 years of unspoken history, of humiliation and survival. As Sophie drifted back into rest, David followed Luna into the hallway. His voice was low, stripped of its usual authority. "Why?" Luna turned, her eyes cool and sharp. "Why what? Why help her? After everything I did to you and your mother, why save my daughter?" His words cracked, as though the admission itself cost him more than money ever could. Luna studied him carefully, then answered, "Because Sophie is not you. And because I chose to build my life on healing, not hatred. That's the difference between us, Mr. Morrison. You use power to destroy. I use mine to give life." David swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing against him. For the first time he felt the sting of genuine shame, unsoftened by excuses. Later that afternoon, Luna returned with her briefcase. She set it on the small table in Sophie's room, her movements deliberate. Sophie looked up curiously. "What's in there?" "Documents," Luna answered simply. "Things your father should see." David's stomach twisted as she opened the case, revealing a red folder. Luna's fingers lingered on the papers as she spoke. "Mr. Morrison, my lawyer has compiled years of evidence against you. Tax evasion. Labor exploitation. Blacklisting domestic workers. 47 families ruined under your empire." Sophie's head whipped toward her father, her face pale. "Dad?" David stammered. "Sophie, I?" But Luna's voice cut through him like a blade. "Don't bother denying it. The records are clear. The lawsuits you buried, the settlements you silenced, the wages you stole. My mother's story wasn't unique. It was one of many. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. How could you do this? All those families, all those children. David's shoulders slumped, his empire of pride collapsing in front of his daughter's gaze. I thought it was just business, he muttered weakly. Business, Luna repeated, her voice sharp with restrained fury. Do you know how many children were forced out of school because of your business? How many families lost their homes? How many mothers died like mine, too poor to afford proper treatment? David lowered his head, his voice barely audible. I never thought. That's the problem, Luna said coldly. You never thought. You never cared. And now your daughter sees the truth. Sophie looked at her father as though she no longer recognized him. Dad, I don't know who you are anymore. David's face crumpled, but Luna offered no mercy. She closed the folder with a snap. Justice is already in motion. Carter will file everything with the Department of Labor and the IRS by next week. Your wealth won't protect you this time. David's knees felt weak. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to stand on the edge of collapse with no safety net beneath him. Sophie reached for Luna's hand, her voice trembling. You saved me, even after everything. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, Luna said gently, squeezing her hand. Just live. Use this gift to build something better than what your father built. Sophie nodded, tears streaming down her face. As Luna turned to leave, David called out, desperation cracking his voice. Please, Luna. She paused at the door, her back straight, her voice calm but final. I saved your daughter, Mr. Morrison. But don't mistake that for forgiveness. Some debts cannot be erased, only faced. And with that, she walked away, leaving David alone with the crushing truth. His daughter's hope had come from the very person he once tried to destroy. The news of Sophie's successful operation spread quickly throughout Children's Hope Hospital. Nurses exchanged relieved smiles, other parents in the ward whispered in admiration about the miracle surgeon, and Sophie herself felt the first real glimmers of a future she thought she had lost forever. But while Sophie's world brightened, David's grew darker by the hour. That evening, Luna sat in her office with the blinds half drawn, her briefcase open before her. Stacks of documents filled the desk. Payroll sheets, blacklists, complaints, tax files. Each page was a reminder of the cruelty David had inflicted over decades. Her phone buzzed, another message from James Carter. We're ready. Evidence is complete. Department of Labor filing, Monday. IRS filing, Tuesday. Luna closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. This was more than revenge. It was justice long overdue, not only for her mother but for dozens of families who had lived under David Morrison's shadow. Meanwhile, David sat by Sophie's bedside, unable to escape the weight pressing down on him. He watched his daughter sleep peacefully, her breathing steady for the first time in months. Relief filled him, but so did dread. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Luna's face, calm, composed, but merciless in her pursuit of truth. When Sophie woke later, she found her father slumped in the chair, his face drawn. Dad, she said softly, you look different. Tired. David forced a weak smile. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking. About what? She pressed, her journalist instincts flickering. David hesitated, but Sophie's gaze demanded honesty. He sighed heavily. About mistakes. Choices I made years ago. Choices that hurt people. Sophie reached for his hand, her grip surprisingly strong despite her weakness. Then maybe it's time to make different choices. Her words cut deeper than she knew. For the first time in his life, David Morrison found himself being schooled not by an opponent, not by a rival, but by his own daughter. The next morning Luna returned, her expression unreadable as she checked Sophie's progress. Good muscle response, she said, nodding at Sophie's movements. With therapy you'll regain strength faster than expected. Sophie's smile was radiant. You've given me my life back. Luna's gaze softened for a moment, then shifted to David, her tone cooling instantly. I need to speak with you privately. David followed her into the hallway, his chest tight with dread. Luna closed the door behind them, her voice low and sharp. The documents are ready. Carter will file them within days. The Department of Labor and the IRS will come for you. Years of exploitation, tax fraud, blacklisting, it's all there. You will answer for every life you shattered. David's voice cracked. Please, Luna. I know I was cruel. I know I hurt your mother. But don't do this. Don't ruin Sophie's world by dragging me down. Luna's eyes flashed. Don't you dare use Sophie as your shield. She is innocent. You are not. And this isn't about revenge anymore. It's about accountability. David's shoulders sagged. The man who once strode through life with arrogance and dominance now looked small, cornered. Back in the room, Sophie had overheard fragments of their conversation. When they returned, her eyes searched her father's face. Dad, is it true? David couldn't speak. His silence was all the confirmation she needed. Sophie's voice trembled with disbelief. You built your empire by destroying people. Families like Luna's. Families like Tears welled in her eyes as she turned toward Luna. You saved me, even knowing who my father is. Why? Luna's voice softened as she looked at Sophie. Because healing is stronger than hatred. And because I refuse to let his sins define you. Sophie wept openly, torn between gratitude and heartbreak. David stood frozen, his world unraveling as his daughter clung to the very woman he had once scorned. Later that evening, Luna stood outside the hospital, watching the city lights flicker against the dark sky. Her phone buzzed again, a final confirmation from Carter. The filings were set. Within days, David Morrison's empire would face the collapse he had inflicted on so many others. She slipped her phone back into her pocket, her eyes reflecting the city lights. For 20 years, she had carried the weight of humiliation, waiting for this moment. Now, standing on the edge of justice, she felt something deeper, not triumph, but clarity. The girl who had once been told she was unworthy now held the power to change everything. And David Morrison, once untouchable, was about to learn what it meant to live at the mercy of the people he had tried to silence. 2 days after Sophie's surgery, the atmosphere inside Children's Hope Hospital had shifted. Sophie's recovery was going remarkably well. Each day she regained more strength, each movement a quiet miracle. For the staff, she was just another success story in Dr. Luna Rodriguez's long list of triumphs. But for David Morrison, every step forward his daughter took was a reminder of the trap tightening around him. Luna hadn't needed to say much after their last conversation. Her calm certainty had been more terrifying than anger. He could see it in her eyes, the patience of someone who had waited 2 decades for justice, and the power of a woman who now held every advantage. Sophie, meanwhile, grew more curious about the world around her. She spent hours on her laptop, her journalist instincts refusing to rest. One afternoon, while her father dozed in the chair beside her bed, she typed furiously, pulling up records, news clippings, and legal filings. And there it was, her father's name linked to settlements, hidden cases, complaints buried under corporate influence. Her heart ached as she scrolled, the truth staring back at her in cold print. Luna hadn't exaggerated. Her father's empire had been built on the broken backs of people like Carmen Rodriguez. When David stirred awake, Sophie snapped her laptop shut, but her eyes were wet with tears. "Dad," she said quietly, "I know everything now." David froze. "Everything?" "Yes," Sophie whispered. "The lawsuits, the complaints, the blacklist." Luna was right. She swallowed hard. "You didn't just hurt her family. You hurt dozens of families. And all those years I thought you were a hero, you were hiding the truth." David's voice cracked. "Sophie, I did what I thought was necessary to keep us safe, to keep our company strong." Her face hardened. "Safe for who, Dad? Strong for what? You destroyed people's lives and called it business." The words stung more than any attack Luna had ever delivered. His daughter's disappointment pierced him deeper than shame itself. Later that evening, Luna visited again, checking Sophie's progress. She found Sophie sitting upright, determination in her eyes. "Dr. Rodriguez," she said softly, "I read about you. About your life. You weren't just a doctor who beat the odds. You became one of the best in the world despite everything my father did to you. Luna smiled faintly. I built my life on the lessons of pain. Every no I was given became fuel for a louder yes. Sophie blinked back tears. And still, you saved me. You deserve a future, Sophie, Luna said gently. Your father's choices don't define who you are. What matters is what you do with the life you've been given. David, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. What do you want from me, Luna? She turned to face him, her gaze steady. I already have what I wanted. My career. My power. My mother's legacy honored. But what I will take from you is the illusion that you can hurt people without consequence. That ends now. David's fists clenched. So this is revenge? No, Luna replied calmly. This is justice. Revenge is about destruction. Justice is about balance. And balance is long overdue. The next morning Rosa, the receptionist, handed David an envelope. This came for you, she said, her tone unreadable. Inside were the preliminary filings Carter had prepared, a preview of the storm about to hit. Tax discrepancies, labor exploitation evidence, dozens of sworn testimonies. David's hands shook as he read, each page a nail in the coffin of the empire he had built. He stumbled into Sophie's room, collapsing into the chair. Sophie reached for the papers, scanning them with wide eyes. It's all true, she whispered. Everything Luna said. David couldn't speak. His throat closed as his daughter looked at him, her gaze filled with a mixture of sorrow and disappointment. Sophie's voice trembled, but her resolve was firm. Dad, maybe this is the lesson you were meant to learn. You spent your life believing power made you untouchable. But now, you're powerless. And the only person who can save you is the little girl you once tried to break. Her words echoed like a prophecy. David buried his face in his hands, the weight of years pressing down until his shoulders shook. For Luna, watching from a distance, it was not triumph she felt but clarity. She had not destroyed him. He was destroying himself under the truth. All she had done was hold up the mirror. And Sophie, sitting between them, began to understand what her life's purpose might become. Not just survival but transformation. By the third week of Sophie's recovery, the Morrison name was already unraveling in the outside world. News outlets had caught wind of sealed complaints that James Carter's team had begun unearthing. Whispers of labor exploitation, tax fraud, and decades of cover-ups rippled through business circles like cracks in a glass window spreading under pressure. But inside Children's Hope Hospital, Sophie was focused on something else: walking. Each day, with the help of physical therapists, she pushed herself further. First a twitch of her foot, then a slow bend of her knee, and now the wobbly attempt to stand. Each small victory lit her face with a kind of joy David hadn't seen in years. One afternoon, Luna stood in the corner of Sophie's therapy room, clipboard in hand. She observed quietly as Sophie struggled to take 3 shaky steps with assistance, determination etched on her face. When Sophie collapsed back into the chair, sweating and laughing, Luna finally spoke. That's progress. Real progress. Sophie beamed, pride glowing in her eyes. It feels like a miracle. David, watching nearby, smiled faintly, but his relief was tainted by the knowledge that every step Sophie took was made possible by the woman who held his future in her hands. Later, when Sophie was resting, Luna approached David in the hallway. She carried another folder, this one marked in red. It's done, she said. Carter's filings have gone through. By next week you'll be facing federal investigators. David's chest tightened. Please, Luna, he whispered. Is there nothing I can do? No way to stop this. Luna studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Do you remember what you told me 20 years ago in that garden? That I wasn't fit to stand beside your daughter? David winced, the memory like a blade. You silenced my mother with fear, Luna continued. You silenced me with humiliation. You silenced dozens of families with poverty. But the thing about silence is that it doesn't last forever. Eventually, the truth speaks louder. David's voice cracked. You've already won. You saved my daughter. You proved me wrong. Why destroy me completely? Luna's gaze hardened. Because this isn't about you and me anymore. It's about justice for every name in these files. She tapped the folder. Your empire was built on broken backs. It's time it collapses under its own weight. David's hands trembled as he reached for the folder, but Luna pulled it back. You'll see it soon enough in court. The following day, Sophie called Luna into her room privately. I know what you're doing, she said softly. You're bringing everything my father did into the light. Luna nodded. It's overdue. Sophie's eyes glistened with tears. I don't blame you. He hurt you. He hurt your mother. He hurt people who didn't deserve it. But please, Dr. Rodriguez, please don't let me lose both my health and my father at the same time. Luna's expression softened, but her voice stayed firm. Sophie, I saved your life because you deserved a chance to live free of your father's shadow. What happens to him now is the consequence of his choices, not mine. Sometimes the only way forward is through truth, no matter how painful. Sophie lowered her gaze, her heart torn between love for her father and admiration for Luna. Then promise me one thing, she whispered. That whatever happens you won't let hatred define you. Luna placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Hatred didn't bring me here, Sophie. Determination did. Compassion did. Your father never understood the difference. But you do. That's why your future can be different. That night, Luna walked out of the hospital into the cool evening air. Reporters were already beginning to gather outside, their cameras flashing as rumors of an unfolding scandal grew louder. She kept her head high, her coat brushing against her knees as she walked past them in silence. In his apartment across town, David sat alone at his desk. The mansion was gone, sold off in a desperate attempt to keep ahead of legal fees. All that remained was a stack of papers, letters from attorneys, and headlines branding him a fraud. His phone buzzed relentlessly with calls from former partners cutting ties, but he didn't answer. For the first time in decades, David Morrison felt the crushing silence of irrelevance. Meanwhile, Sophie sat by her hospital window, looking out at the city lights. She thought about Luna's words, about truth and compassion, about building something better. And for the first time she began to see her future clearly, not as David Morrison's daughter but as her own woman. And somewhere deep inside, David knew, the girl he had once dismissed as unworthy had not only survived, she had risen so high that she now held the power to decide the legacy of his name. 6 months later, the world of David Morrison no longer resembled the empire he had once commanded. His mansion, the very one where he had humiliated a child 2 decades earlier, was gone. His companies had collapsed under the weight of lawsuits, tax audits, and labor claims. Headlines branded him as a fallen mogul, his name synonymous with greed and exploitation. But across town, inside the same hospital where Sophie had taken her first steps toward recovery, Luna Rodriguez walked with a presence that carried both grace and authority. She was no longer just a celebrated surgeon. She was a symbol. Young doctors looked at her with awe, nurses smiled when she passed, and patients' families whispered her name with gratitude. That morning, Dr. Williams caught up to her in the corridor, holding a gold envelope. It's official, he said, a proud smile on his face. The Physician of the Year award. You're the youngest doctor ever to receive it. Luna accepted the envelope with a calm smile, though her heart swelled with quiet triumph. The memory of her 9-year-old self standing in the Morrison garden flickered in her mind. Back then, she had been told she wasn't worthy to stand beside Sophie. Now the world stood to honor her. And there's more, Dr. Williams continued. The documentary about your life, from cleaning to surgery, has been nominated for an Emmy. Guess who's one of the producers? Luna raised an eyebrow, though she already knew. Sophie, she said softly. Yes, Dr. Williams confirmed. She insisted. The irony was poetic. The child who once reached out to her in tears now stood beside her, helping to share her story with the world. Meanwhile, David sat hunched in a cramped apartment, signing the last of his bankruptcy papers. His lawyer, weary and detached, packed up files. Mr. Morrison, the lawyer said flatly, I regret to inform you that we cannot continue representing you in the criminal proceedings. Your remaining assets aren't enough to cover our fees. David looked out the window. Gone was the sweeping garden, replaced by a view of dingy brick walls and overflowing trash bins. At 63, the man who had once believed himself untouchable now faced the possibility of prison. Even worse, Sophie had walked away from him completely. She had dropped the Morrison surname, reclaiming her mother's name. Every article she wrote about labor rights, every speech she gave about justice, was another nail in the coffin of his legacy. He remembered her last words to him, words that cut deeper than any headline. "Dad, I need to build a life on values you never taught me. Luna showed me that true strength isn't about crushing others, it's about lifting them up." The day of Luna's awards ceremony, television cameras broadcasted her story to millions. The host asked her gently, "Dr. Rodriguez, how does it feel to know that your journey has inspired so many young people from underprivileged communities?" Luna's expression was serene. "I believe every injustice we endure can become fuel for determination. When I was 9 years old, David Morrison humiliated me in his garden. He believed he was putting me in my place. In truth, he was pushing me toward a place far greater than he could ever imagine." The audience erupted into applause, the camera capturing Luna's steady smile. She went on, "Today I run one of the largest scholarship programs in the country, specifically for children of domestic workers. Already, 50 new doctors have graduated through this program. Each one of them carries a story like mine. Each one is proof that no barrier is too great when determination guides you." Across town, David watched the broadcast from his small apartment. He could barely hear over the hum of the radiator, but the words struck him like a hammer. Later that week, headlines told two parallel stories. Former millionaire sentenced to 8 years in prison for labor exploitation. Dr. Luna Rodriguez receives International Human Rights Award. The contrast was brutal, poetic, and absolute. Sophie, now fully recovered, ran each morning through the very garden where her father had once forbidden Luna to stand. Except the mansion no longer belonged to him. Sophie had turned it into a foundation for domestic worker families, a sanctuary for those once cast aside. Standing before the press, Sophie said, "The best revenge is not to destroy those who hurt you, but to rise so high that their cruelty becomes irrelevant. My father tried to break the spirit of a 9-year-old girl. Instead, he helped forge one of the greatest surgeons of her generation." The crowd erupted in applause, and Sophie felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. That night, in his cell awaiting transfer, David received a letter. The handwriting was elegant, the signature unmistakable, Dr. Luna Rodriguez. The message was brief but devastating in its clarity. "Mr. Morrison, when I was 9, you told me I didn't belong beside your daughter. Today, I lead the neurosurgery department that saved her. I chair a foundation changing thousands of lives. You were right about one thing, I never belonged in your world. My place has always been far above it. Thank you for showing me, even if by cruelty, that true power is not born from privilege, but from turning every wound into purpose." David folded the letter with shaking hands. For the first time he fully understood the depth of his defeat. He had tried to bury a seed, and instead, he had planted a tree that grew taller than anything he could have imagined. 5 years later, the world knew the name Dr. Luna Rodriguez not only as one of the youngest and most skilled neurosurgeons in the country, but as a voice for justice. She had built something larger than herself, an institution dedicated to turning adversity into opportunity. The grand opening of the Carmen Rodriguez Institute of Social Medicine filled the air with excitement. Banners hung proudly, the press swarmed outside, and rows of young medical students, many from families of domestic workers, filled the auditorium with wide eyes and hopeful hearts. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Sophie stood at Luna's side. Her legs were steady, her steps strong, a living symbol of both medical triumph and second chances. She smiled as she cut the ribbon, her voice ringing clear. "This institute is proof that healing is not just about medicine but about justice." Inside, Luna approached the podium. She looked out at the crowd, students, doctors, families, activists, and felt a swell of emotion. "My mother used to tell me," Luna began, her voice carrying strength, "that some people are born thinking they're better than others. But she also taught me that those with good hearts always find a way to shine." The audience leaned in, silent, moved. This place, Luna continued, is not just a hospital. It is a promise. A promise that every child, no matter their background, will have access to care. A promise that no mother will be silenced by poverty. A promise that injustice will never have the last word. The applause thundered, a standing ovation that shook the hall. Tears shone in the eyes of students who had once believed their dreams impossible. Among the crowd sat Sophie, her hand pressed to her heart. She thought of the 9-year-old Luna who had once been pulled away from her in a garden, told she wasn't worthy. Now Sophie watched that same girl, grown, powerful, radiant, transform pain into purpose. Far from the celebration in a gray prison cell, David Morrison sat hunched on a narrow cot. He was 68 now, his hair thinner, his frame frilier. The man who once commanded boardrooms and silenced others with money now lived among concrete walls and iron bars. In the silence of his cell he often thought of Luna. He thought of the words she left him in her letter, words that haunted him more than any sentence the court had delivered. True power is not born from privilege, but from turning every wound into purpose. For David it was too late. But for Luna, it had become a guiding light. Back at the institute, as cameras flashed and applause filled the air, Luna looked out at the young faces in the audience. Many of them were children of janitors, housekeepers, and farm workers. She knew their struggles. She carried their stories in her own blood. To those of you sitting here today, Luna said, her voice steady, know this, you are not defined by where you come from. You are defined by what you choose to build. And here in this place you will build futures that no one can take away. The ovation rose again, echoing off the high ceilings. It was not just applause, it was a collective affirmation that the cycle had been broken. Later, as Sophie and Luna walked through the institute's new hallways, Sophie whispered, you know, my father tried to bury you all those years ago. But he didn't bury you, Luna. He planted you. And you grew into something he could never destroy. Luna smiled softly. That's the secret, Sophie. The best revenge isn't to become like those who hurt us. It's to rise so high that their cruelty becomes nothing more than proof of how wrong they were. The two women paused at a mural painted on the institute's lobby wall. A young girl twirling in a garden, her arms outstretched in joy. Beneath it, bold words read, "From humiliation to hope." Sophie's eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "You turned his cruelty into a revolution.